Okay, this is another in the series of the Taylor Family Association Hangouts. Today, we're going to discuss identifying deceased persons in your database, and Ron is prepared to handle that. And we have Eileen Phelps with us down in New Mexico, and we're glad to have her with us. Okay, Ron, you're on.
Okay, I'm just starting here with. It sounds like we've got a lot of feedback for some reason. Okay. Anyway, I'll just home in on that one. So I've got my screen up. Can you still hear me okay? What we're going to be talking about is how to find some of these deceased people in our database. And of course, we don't want to look at everybody in the database because that might be too overwhelming. So what we want to do is to start with a limited set. In this case, I'm going to take William Taylor, that was 1787, married to Elizabeth Patrick. I'm going to take him and find all of his descendants. So the first thing I'm going to do is tag him on tag number 1, and I want to untag number 1 first to make sure that it's not being used for some other purpose. So I'm running the untag on tag number 1 for everyone. Once that's finished, I'm going to come back and say tag on tag number 1, all of his descendants. And again, descendants, and say OK. So this is going to tag all of William Taylor's descendants on tag number 1. Then we can use that tag number 1 to determine who we want to look for some of these missing death dates and death places. So this is still calculating. While it's calculating, I want to point out there's on the advanced tagging tool, there's a new column right here called counts. This actually shows how many people are tagged on each one of the 9 tags. And you see, just barely popped up here and says that there's 59,121 descendants of William Taylor in the database. Now, that's a little bit deceptive because that includes spouses. So that's not his actual blood descendants. That's descendants plus spouses. There's another way we could determine just the blood descendants if we wanted to. Anyway, so those are tagged, 59,000 of them. Next, we're going to close that, and you can see the tag shows up colored, and of course the spouse's tag is also showing up like on Elizabeth Patrick as tagged. So, having that in place, next let's find out what date we're looking for. If we were looking for people that are more than 100 years old and we couldn't figure out how to calculate that, that one's pretty easy because just 100 years from today's date would be September the 12th, 1914, right? Okay, but if we didn't know that, if we were looking for some other weird date, we could click on a person and we can use the date calculator that's built into Legacy. It's right up here in the top. We click on that, and you can put in your first date. Let's say 12th of September 2015. And then the first date, you leave that empty, and you click on how many years you want. Let's say we want 100 years, 0 months, and 0 days. Then we can calculate the first date. That comes out 12th of September 1915. So I was off a year. All right? So that's the date we want to use. I'm just going to copy that, Control-C that out of the field, and close the calendar. The calendar can be used for lots of other things, but that's not part of this discussion. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go to a search, and I'm going to search for individuals that have tag 1, meaning that they're part of the descendancy of William Taylor, and they have a birth date that is before the date we put in our buffer. So we want anybody that's born before 12/15, the 12th of September 1915. That makes them more than 100 years old. And then we'll say create a list. So here's our list. We've got 8,209 individuals. Okay, we don't want all those. Let's go back and put one more thing in our search. We're going to say search. And the nice thing about legacy is it remembers the last parameters you used, so you don't have to try to remember what you had before. We're going to add a third condition. We're going to say and they have a death date that is blank. So death date equals blank. Now let's create a list. That's a lot more reasonable. We have 631 people that are descendants of William Taylor that are over 100 years old, and they don't have a death date. Now, there might be a few exceptions. I know we found a few people that are over 100 years old that are still alive, but those are exceptions to the rule. Most people are deceased before they hit 100. So what we want to do is let's look down through here and find somebody that we might want to research. And this same principle applies to a small slice or the whole database. Doesn't matter. You'll be able to find them the same way. Let's take, here's a good one, Eva Lillian Boyer. I know this Boyer guy did a lot of work on the database back in probably prior to 1960. But so let's look at his record here. I'm going to pull that one up. And he has a daughter named Eva Lillian Boyer, born 1877. She's obviously deceased by now. We don't have the information on her. Let's first of all check the church file, see what's going on. So I'm going to click on the little red arrows, and I've got to log in here. If you've logged in on this computer, just was converted to Windows 10, so it doesn't have my login on there yet. But if you'd log in before, it would have retained that setting and logged in for you automatically. So what we're doing is we're asking the church file, what do they have on this person? I'm going to go full screen here. Okay, so here we got Eva. This is on the left-hand column. This is our person in our legacy database. In the right-hand column, this is the person on the church file that we're looking for. And right up here, it's got a little message. It's telling us that it's retrieving that person from the church file. Okay, now it's finished retrieving it. We can see the green fields are the ones that are exactly the same between our files. A yellow field means that one side has it, the other side doesn't. And a pink field, or what's supposed to be red, means that they're the same but with a slight difference. So like here on Kaysville, we have the county, the church file does not. But the date is the same because it's in green. And the same thing holds all the way down through here. So let's take, for example, the church file's only got the birth, and we only have the birth, which is interesting. So neither one of us has the death date for Eva Lillian Boyer. Let's see if we can find it some other way really quick. So I'm going to go back out of the church file. Let's take Eva Lillian Boyer. You notice the underline here, or the color bar. That means that she is currently selected person in the database. I'm going to go Internet, search the Internet for the current person. And let's search find a grave. It's right there. And here's her data that's going to be passed into the search for the internet. And I'll say search. And I know you don't see that screen on right now, but it didn't find her on. Let's try a different search. Let's search for myheritage.com. See if that one finds anything. Okay, I'm going to put this screen over so you can see what I'm talking about. Here's some of the results for Eva Lillian Boyer. That one shows that she has a birth date under the MyHeritage family trees. There's another one. There's another one. I'm not seeing any of them with a death date here. Here's one that has a death date. You see it? It looks like the birth year is off 1 year compared to these others, but it's obviously her, and says that she died in 1965 in Los Angeles. So I'm going to take that one back to my file. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to put March 13th, 1965. And I don't know if it's the city, so I'll just put Los Angeles, the county. And that gives me something to work for. But see, now she doesn't have a blank death date. So if I did that search again, she would not be part of the search because she now has information in her death field. Okay, so that still needs to be sourced and verified, but at least we have a clue. We could look down through here and see a few more spots. We might even, in 1965, we might be lucky and get an entry in the Social Security Death Index for her. Anyway, there's lots of Eva Boyers that are probably not the one we're looking for. But that one's one. Let's try one more so you can see the principle. So I'm going to go back to the search results. This is on my toolbar. Search results. These are the same without re-performing the search. The computer program keeps keeps track of that list of people that were last found and just automatically puts that one back up. Here's another interesting one. I've got Eldred Clarence Stevenson. I remember he was present at the last the Taylor reunion at Far West. Do you remember that one, Gordon? Yeah, he was there, and he was already over 100. So let's find out if we can find a deceased record for him yet. So I'm going to select him. Let's first of all see how old he might be. It says that he could be 102. See it right there on the edit screen? So he might still be alive because we know he was alive, was that 2 years ago? Approximately 1 year ago. Okay, so he might still be alive. Let's try and find him. So I'm going to say Internet, search the current person. Let's look on MyHeritage just for fun. Says it's loading still. Here it comes. So here's Edward Clarence Stevenson. It's got 1914. I don't see a death date on that. Here's 1913. 1913. Here he is in the 1940 census, if you wanted to see more of his family or something. Here's his marriage, April 6, 1936, to Margaret Ann DeWitt. Let's jump back over there and see if we've got that. How about that? Margaret Ann DeWitt, 24th of June, 1935, Farmington. So if you wanted a source for his marriage, this one says 1936. This one says June 1935. I don't know which one's right. Somebody needs to do some research on that one because we've got two different dates. What we could do is post an alternate date right here. So I clicked on the marriage. I'm going to say add an alternate marriage. And the marriage was, whoops, the marriage was April 6, 1936. And it didn't give us the city, but there you got an alternate. And if you look at this little thing, this is the events. When it turns the color, that means that there's something in there. So we can see that it has an alternate marriage in there. We could also source that. But anyway, I don't see information on a death. Here's his other marriage. Look at that. June 24th, 1935 in, oh, that's a burial. That's for, let's check it out. This is a tombstone. If we can get in here. So there's the tombstone, and it shows the marriage date right on the tombstone. So I'm going to guess that that's the right marriage date, and it shows that Margaret, named called Peggy, died June 16th, 1995. Let's go back to our legacy file. How about that? So this one here is most likely the correct date for the marriage. Okay, well, so we can't find Clarence Stevenson anywhere. He's probably still alive, and we might want to make a note of that. We could say, for example, in the notes, I've already done this before, but in the notes I said Eldred and Brian Lake Taylor were interviewed by Ruth Barker at the Far West Taylor Reunion 2014. So that's pretty good evidence that they were still alive. Okay, let's try one more. This time we'll search for somebody we haven't seen yet. How about, oh, I don't know. Let's search by surname here and see if we can find somebody. We got lots of Taylors we can look at. How about Elmer Woolsey? Elmer Woolsey Taylor. And his pedigree goes up through Jedediah Allen, Allen Taylor, William Taylor. Let's see if we can find this guy. So he's born, whoops, I jumped somewhere. He's born around 1909. We don't even have his birth date correct yet. But we know he's probably dead based on that estimated birth date. Let's see if we can find him. I'm going to go search. Let's look at MyHeritage again. Okay, here's an Elmer Woolsey. Wrong parents. The parents we want are Alan Jedediah and Lizzie Wilson. So we're looking for somebody with those parents. And as you can see, it's not going to be a simple one. There's too many Elmer Taylors. That one's going to take some time to solve. But the point is we need to find him because we don't have his death date. Okay, now the last point that we were going to talk about, some of our researchers are putting additional information into the death field or the burial field. Let me show you what happens if you do that on Elmer Woolsey. right now, let's consider that he's living. Okay, I'm going to just save that. So if he's considered to be living, as soon as you put something in here like as soon as I put something in there, let's say died in Salt Lake City, that changes it to dead. No matter what that means, you might have intended that to mean that he lives in Salt Lake City. But if you put it in the death field or in the burial field, it means that he's dead. The computer thinks he's dead. Same thing with the dates. If you put anything in the death date or the burial date, it means that person's dead. So don't use those fields for things that don't mean that what they're intended for. Okay. I guess one last thing we ought to look at really quick is what we call advanced set living. So you go to Tools, Advanced Set Living, and under there you can give a date. I'm sorry, you can give an age at which you think everybody should have died. I put in 108 because I think we have one person in our file that was 107 when she died. So I put 108 there, and then I just run the program. And that should come back and make it Elmer Woolsey Taylor and maybe a few others. It should identify them as deceased, I think. They might not get him because that wouldn't be 108 years. That would only be 107. Anyway, the computer's calculating based on all of the surrounding information for each person in the database. It's trying to determine whether they should be dead. For example, maybe they have children that were born more than 108 years ago. Therefore, the parents are obviously born more than 108 years ago, and therefore they should be deceased. We'll just give this another few seconds here, and we should see some results. And obviously, this will run way faster on a smaller database.
Ron, how many people do we have in the database now?
I'll show you how to tell that. The same thing will apply to a slice. Okay, so this program found 111 people who were not already set as deceased that should have been set as deceased. And there they are, 111 people that were just now set. Doesn't mean we set their death date, but we set their indicator. If we look at Woolsey Taylor, for example, he didn't get set because it's not 108 years. But it sets that indicator right there. And then I'll show you the count. So if you go to Legacy Home tab, over here on the right-hand side are the statistics for the file. And this one's not the newest file. The newest file, I think, is 258,000 something, or 259. So there's a lot of collateral lines in the file, that mostly those people that are intermarried with Taylors. Let's go back to our puzzle here, though. So we want to find out, let's do our search one more time. This time we're going to search, and instead of death date equal to blank, let's search for living equal to no. So we got 8,000. And then let's take that list. I'm going to show you how to do more than 3 conditions on a search. So we're going to close that. Come on. I'm going to go back to the search again. And this time I'm going to say search for the death date equal to blank. And I'm gonna, down here at the bottom, I'm only going to search the prior search list. So in other words, this is a fourth condition. And I'll say create the list. So there's 476. We've reduced it by over 200 because we have people that are not indicated as dead. Okay, so there's a pretty good list for somebody to work on. Once they clean that one up, then we could reduce the age to 95, for example, and see if we can find anybody that's over the age of 95 that is deceased. And eventually we work down to a point where we're not really finding anybody, maybe down to 85 or 80. So anyway, that will help us to clean up all these people that should be deceased and we just don't have them marked yet. Okay, did we answer all the questions?
We did, Ron. So what we have just shown everybody can be used for any of the slicers working on their particular group, right?
That is correct.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for this spending time to talk about how we identify deceased persons in the Legacy Family Tree Database. Thank you, Ron.
Okay.